Great. So would you mind providing for the people listening or watching a brief overview of just your educational background, your current role at the university, and any current projects of yours?
Okay, so now um, I'm doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Wesleyan University in Connecticut at the Center for the Humanities. Um, and prior to that, um, I completed my PhD in performance studies at Northwestern. And prior to that, I got an MFA in dance, actually, from the University of California at Irvine, which I did as a Fulbright scholar. And then that all happened after I worked in South Africa, but also studied there, where I got my bachelor's degree in media and cultural studies, as well as drama and performance studies. Um, and when I got that degree, that was actually my first time pursuing the theatrical arts period. I mean, in high school, I sang in the choir. But in terms of just like my involvement in the dramatic arts, whether through practice or history or criticism, that work really began in undergrad at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And it was kind of a mistake because I was going to major in media studies and psychology. I attended one psychology lecture and I was like, this is nice, but yeah. And I ended up in the theater department because another major I was trying to pursue was English. And I took one semester of English, and then the second semester, two departments were offering like a similar like introductory course, as in like the readings were quite similar. And I was like, do I want to read Othello in the theater department or the English department? And I went with the theater department. And I haven't looked back ever since.
That's great. Yeah. And then the other part of that question is just any current projects of yours that you were willing to share.
Yeah, it's been hard with, with COVID, because a lot of the projects that I was thinking of doing, kind of took a backseat. Mm-hmm. And so then, because, I have to work from home, like my concentration or my energy is now, at least for the past year, has been invested in just more reading and writing and trying to produce more academic work.
Perfect. You kind of answered my next question a little bit, but I'd love to know like what sparked your interest in studying dance and Black performance in particular, and maybe how some of your childhood or early adulthood experiences shape the work you do now.
The interesting thing about dance is that like a lot of Black people who have training in dance have have a somewhat contentious relationship with the field, especially with the training, because a lot of people start dancing when they're 3, and they go through the training. Some of it in ballet, and of course it's all about discipline, and discipline means so many different things for so many different teachers training them. And so what that means is that they actually sometimes develop this kind of contentious, fraught relationship with dance, even as they continue to pursue it and find ways of practicing dance that undo a lot of the trauma that is associated with the training. But with me, because I didn't have any of that training, and I trained in dance within a theater department, so there was no focus, no sort of rigorous focus on technique or a technique. And so the training was just in physical theater and more sort of creative devised experimental movement, which was about honoring the practice without marrying it too much to discipline and punishment and that sort of thing. So I never went through some of the more traumatic things that are associated with dance training, because my introduction to dance training was through an approach that was very much trying to undo those things as the starting place, you know. And that's what got me interested in dance. And then, of course, it was interesting to me that even in undergrad, when we would go and see a dance, it was very interesting to me that I didn't understand. Like, I didn't take that as something that was bad. It just made me more curious that, like, something that they call the language, of dance, was something that I did not have access to. I was slightly frustrated, but also curious.
Okay.
And I made it a point to actually pursue the practice and history and theorization, so that I would be able to sit with the dance work or movement work and not so much take it apart in terms of what it means, but in terms of what it does in the world and to the world. Like, what does it enact? What kind of sensibility does it inaugurate or encourage?
And then this question is probably the meat of the interview, but I'd love to know, like, what does the term Black Shakespeare or Black Shakespearean mean to you through your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know. Not because I haven't thought about it, but because I think whenever I think about it, it always changes. This is the thing, I have an academic practice and a more practice-based investment. And it's not that those two things don't mix, but it's just that when the place where I think about Shakespeare the most is not really in my academic work, it's in my practice-based work. And so going back to your question, I do think about what makes something that we call a Black Shakespeare or a Black approach to Shakespeare. But to me, I think that probably gestures towards something that is a way, something that is not what comes to my mind is not just an exclusive investment in Black representation in Shakespeare. Although I think that is important. I think it is important for Black people to be represented if that's what they want to do. to be represented in these Shakespeare productions. But for me, a term like Black Shakespeare is more than just about representation. It's about being very thoughtful about what Blackness is and what Blackness brings, and Blackness not just as an identity category, but Blackness is also, you know, a way of knowing, moving, sensing, as a sensibility and posture and orientation in the world, maybe. So to me, a term like Black Shakespeare is not about representation, but it's about like, how do you actually introduce these urgent Black questions that help us read Shakespeare differently, not just differently, but also in ways that maybe have not been attended to before.
That's perfect. You did talk about how you're usually interacting with Shakespeare through practice. So I was wondering if you have any experiences or really um, any ideas about like what that part of it means to be Black and also um, produce or practice the plays.
Yeah. So, you know, I actually, you know, I've participated, I mean, in undergrad, I think I participated in two like full length Shakespeare productions. I played Ariel in The Tempest, and I played Bianca in Taming of the Shrew. So, in terms of just like more like straightforward theater productions of Shakespeare that I've been in, those are the two. Um, and you know, the experience was great. And I say it was great not just because it was just fun to do, but also because it was very, you know, after those experiences, I had a lot of questions um, about Shakespeare, about questions of race, and sex, gender. I had so many questions about that, and I started thinking about how do I pose these questions in a way that I think gets close to not answering them, but attending to them in a way that reduces the amount of violence in the representation itself. And so for me, I had to find ways of dealing with these questions and of being in conversation with William Shakespeare in ways that are not sort of straightforward dialogue like you would. So I didn't want to actually direct, I don't know, Othello, like a, you know, the place and have a play script and read the lines. Although I do find that you know, extremely interesting. It was important for me to work in a language that was a little bit more disjointed and also almost uncertain and chaotic. You know, we always think of chaos as something like as meaning. As having, you know, I don't know, negative connotations because, you know, it suggests an arrangement that, you know, is just all over the place. But I actually find a lot of potential in the chaotic, but also the fragmented, because I think that Black people and our history, and there's a kind of fragmentation that defines certain aspects of our being, and it's important for me to choose a mode of staging that where you can see that fragmentation, where you can see not intelligible thoughts and words, but chaos and disjointedness.
All right.
And I think that the mode that I chose to work in actually encapsulates that. I mean, one more important thing I'm going to say about this is, in my work, in my approach to Shakespeare, when I do these works, I'm not so much interested in characters, right? Because like when you train in acting, that is one of the things that you have to think about, like the character, each character's narrative arc, and I don't know, like their psychological state and what motivates them to act in a certain way. I'm not interested in individual characters at all, but I do think with them as serving a more collective function, as helping us to think about something more structural. And so if I'm thinking with and about Caliban, I'm not just thinking about that character and his psychological drama and his interiority. That's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about what does it mean? What is the function of Caliban? And how does Caliban-ness, what does it look like in the world now? And how do we interact with Caliban-ness in the world right now? And is our response to Caliban-ness any different from how someone like Prospero responds to Caliban in the play? So it's important for me to actually not centralize individual characters and their interiority and their individual narrative arcs, but to actually also think about like the kind of collective, things that they help us think about.
Yeah, sorry, my questions are all like theoretical and big. So I apologize for that. But I did have another question. So we have some Shakespeare plays that portray Black characters, Othello, The Tempest, Antony and Cleopatra, Titus and Andronicus. So then I had two questions. How do you think they've shaped Western ideas about Blackness? So how do you think these Shakespeare plays and characters play a role in just ideas and conceptions about what it means to be Black and racial struggles? And then my second question is just about how can we perform those Black characters and plays today? And you touched upon that a little bit just now.
So, I mean,
I can repeat them because I think I threw a lot.
I actually, let me actually respond to the first one first, which is about like all these sort of post-colonial takes on Shakespeare. And thank you so much for that list. I'm going to try and spend the summer reading all of them. I read some, but I'm going to spend some of the summer, actually seriously reading most, if not all of them. But to answer your question, I think that like right now, the one that I've been thinking with is Aimé Césaire's A Tempest, which is what helped me create the piece that was performed at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And of course, Césaire is doing so many things in that version or rewrite of The Tempest. But one thing that stood out to me was Ariel, this time around, because this engagement is sustained, right? So I've done iterations of this elsewhere, but this time I really actually wanted to concentrate on Ariel, not as an individual character, but Arielness, and what that means and what that describes in terms of Blackness. And for Césaire, he seems to be interested with the figure of the Black, and these are my words, the Black maybe sellout for lack of a better word, or collaborator, the Black who actually not only collaborates or colludes with the master and the master narrative and the master's institutions and over identifies with them, but also someone who will actually like partake in coiling Black rebellion. And so like Ariel or Arielness is something that is very interesting to me. What does it mean to actually be Black, but be acting in ways that postpone or defer the kinds of necessary rebellions that need to be happening? And what does it mean to have to be Black and invested in participating in the work of global empire?
Mm.
And of course, I think people, Black people know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't actually need to like give you a list of names that I was thinking with and about while this was happening. And I think we can all see where global and specifically US imperialism is now, and how it does not have Black faces. And so what does it mean to think about like the number of ways in which for some Black people, survival looks like participating in the machinations of empire. And I think that like Césaire gave us something interesting to help us think about those questions.
You actually beat me. My next question was just going to be about that production. It's called The Most Efficient, Most Collegial Negro in the Whole Entire World. But I would love to know a little bit about the origins of the project, why The Tempest, any struggles along the way, and then maybe like what were your ultimate goals or what you hope the audience would see or gain.
Yeah. So for that, like I said, I had done like two like iterations. And it's hard for me to even call these like evening length standalone performances, because I think that it's part of a process that is not finished, right? So I did an iteration of The Tempest, which looks very different from the video that I showed you in Cape Town. I haven't received the video yet, but I will send you the pictures of that, which was more of a kind of installation piece that again was not trying to think with or about individual characters, but I was really trying to think seriously about territory in that, and it was called Terra Nullius, which is, it was called Tetra Nullius, which was a play on words on the term Terra Nullius that suggests, that Africa is like this kind of blank slate without history, which of course is false. So I was really trying to think about like these questions of territory in Cape Town, in a settler colony like South Africa. And then I did a second iteration in Chicago, actually, at Access Lab, which is right under the Argyle, or was right under the Argyle Red Line stop on the north side. And what I was curious about then, and of course I was still working with the Tempest, was that was called Train slash, what was that called? Let me think about it. I'll give you the title and I'll send you the pictures. But I was thinking very seriously about prosperousness, and not necessarily just prosper the character, but like the function of prosperousness. And then, like I said, like the MCA iteration was thinking about questions of Black collaboration, which was also, you know, the word collaboration. I was like, okay, I really have to like find really great collaborators. And I worked with Joel, and who did the sound for the piece, and I worked with Zach, who was a performer. And I was also very deliberate about working with people that where we could sit. So the process was very interesting, because what people see at the MCA, you know, they think that that's the final product. But in fact, the whole thing was the performance, including like the rehearsals that people were not there. That was all part of the process, because I was working with these two Black performers that also that have, you know, one of them has West African and Caribbean heritage, and the other one is like, you know, Caribbean heritage. And it just made sense to me. We were reading Césaire, and they were excited about reading Césaire and some other sort of Caribbean literature. So a lot, you know, we read The Tempest, of course, but we also read some poetry, and we wrote a lot. We did a lot of writing exercises. Some of that, you know, still exists, you know, in my personal archive. Yeah. So the practice then becomes not about getting ready for a performance on the whatever date in January, but that every time we show up, that is part of the practice, and there's no hierarchy between process and product. But at the same time, it's not like this fetishization of process. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I was interested in knowing a little bit more about, I lost it, but the origin of the project, and then your goals and what you were hoping to get out of it. Maybe if you had any struggles throughout this process.
Not so much, not really, because but I think that like that also, you know, to answer your question about like how this came about, it came about as a response to certain struggles I had with when I participated in like theatrical productions of like The Tempest or The Taming of the Shrew, you know. So those struggles were what drove the creation of this series of works, because I was like, when I did the theatrical productions or acted in them, there was a lot that was great, but there was also some struggles. And I wanted to create this book in order to attend to those things that made me feel uneasy before. And I wanted to get at what exactly it was. And like I said, it was important for me to actually work in a language that was very fragmented and unintelligible at times, and actually taking apart language itself and being very deliberate about like talking about the role of language in colonialism, which is also something that I think Césaire helps us understand and see. The language bit. I mean, there's a fabulous line, I think. Well, some might not find it fabulous. Caliban, at some point in one of his confrontations with Prospero in the Shakespeare play, responds to Prospero and he says, and I quote, "You taught me language, and my profit on't is I know how to curse." And that line really just drove a lot of what we actually ended up doing. And so what you see in the clip that I showed you is this attempt to like work with language, and it's of course language is always slipping away, but at the same time language is also being used as part of to carry out the work of domination, the domination of African people. And so we try to tease that out.
Sorry. So you had mentioned Césaire's rework or rewriting of Shakespeare plays. There's obviously been a lot. I have a long list. Keith Hamilton Cobb, Toni Morrison, Janet Sears, Derek Walcott, Lolita Chakrabarty, Bernard Jackson. So you said the Césaire one stood out to you, but I was just wondering if there were any others, or like what it made you realize about yourself, society, or Blackness. You touched upon the Blackness, I think.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's not so much, like I'm very interested in people who actually, I'm interested in people who like write the plays in response to, obviously that's important to me. Like I have a work that's trying to be in conversation with Césaire's play. But I think that also I like responses or interpretations or remakings or reworkings of Shakespeare that have no words, that are a lot more experimental, or that are like that exist in dance. And I just type her name. Dada Masilo is a South African choreographer who also has worked with Shakespeare, also Greek tragedy, just the Western canon is what she works with. And I think she does really interesting things that get me excited about what it means to do this work and actually honor the gravity of the work while placing language under scrutiny. So I would say Dada Masilo. But also there's a kind of a specific, not specific, there's an enactment of, I don't know if this is her intention, so I'm just telling you what I get out of the work, is there seems to be a certain sort of Black feminist sensibility that is going on there that I find interesting, which then, I mean, to answer the very first question that you posed about what I'm working on, maybe I can take this moment to say a little bit about what I had to like put away during this period. And it's pretty much like the next iteration of this project, which is thinking about and with Sycorax, Caliban's mother in The Tempest. Very excited about that. So that's what I've just been thinking about and reading around. And Sycorax is very interesting because she does not appear like in the play. She gets talked about, right? It's like Prosper has a moment where maybe he's talking to Ariel about how about Sycorax, and he's pretty much just telling Ariel to remember that he, Prospero, like rescued Ariel from when Ariel was tied to a tree by Sycorax, who then like died. And then I think Sycorax, yeah, she gets brought up by Caliban, I think a couple of times. One of them being that speech where he's like, "This island's mine by Sycorax, my mother, which thou takest from me. When thou camest first, thou strokest me. No, 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 no. And all the charms of Sycorax, toads, beetles, bats, light on you, for I am all the subject that you have, which first was mine own king, and here you style me in this hard rock while you do keep from me the rest of the island." That speech, you know. So what I'm excited about in this iteration is Sycorax is like this absent presence in The Tempest that just gets talked about. And you know, some Black feminists have written about this. I'm thinking about Bina Busia's article, Silencing Sycorax.
Sorry, yeah, I'm pulling up the plate too.
Something about that, about how to actually, how do you think with Sycorax, and again, not just the individual character, but Sycorax-ness, when you're dealing with like a kind of absented presence, you know, in the play, which might help us think about like how Black women are absented, you know, every day, just materially and in discourse. So those are the things that I'm going to be thinking with in relation to Sycorax-ness, things that are related to absence or the absent presence, and the maternal trace. Because what's interesting, you know, when you, as you know, as I'm doing this research, for example, when you Google like Sycorax, there are representations of Sycorax.
Yeah, I just saw that.
And I'm like, I don't know how you came up with those representations, because maybe I might have to go back to the play and read it again. How do you know? And so what I'm trying to mark is actually the violence of representationalism itself. Like representing Sycorax. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it, but like what has to be further absented for you to come to that type of figuration that you eventually, you know, come to. And I just find it interesting that when you Google Sycorax, there are images of Sycorax, and I'm like, I don't know how you know what she looks like. And so in this work, again, there will be no Sycorax as a figure. And I understand the potential violence of that, or the contradiction, because I'm naming and absenting, but I'm also not representing Sycorax. I choose to actually not have a Sycorax on stage, which some might argue, well, but you're also participating in the absenting. And I'm like, well, maybe, yeah, but I think we also need to think about like why the point is not that. The point is for us to think seriously about the violence that is repeated through figuration and representationalism, that Sycorax is already an absent presence, right? Absented presence, and any attempt to represent Sycorax through figuration would just be people's projections on Sycorax and not what or who Sycorax is. So in order to visually represent Sycorax, you have to like actually project your own investments and create this imago that might actually might not have anything to do with Sycorax at all, but it's just something that you cooked up, which I think can also be very violent. And that's why I choose to think about Sycoraxness rather than Sycorax, the character.
You beat me to the punch again. My next question was just about Black women and their bodies and how they're like uniquely disadvantaged. And then I remember when I was researching you, I found a paper. I don't know if it's released, but it's called Domestic Servitude and the Roots of Care. So I would love if you could elaborate a bit on that.
That's a work in progress. So in that paper, I'm thinking about domestic servitude in 2 or 3 ways. One, domestic servitude in visual artistic representation. 2, domestic servitude in the world. Just what that is like where Black women have to wake up at 6 a.m. And go and wash the dishes and clean houses and take care of like their employers' children. And I'm trying to think about that, and this is not a new argument, but to re-emphasize the kind of slavery aspects of that domestic servitude, or at least the way that it appears in South Africa, is a continuation rather than a break from master-slave relations. And then 3, I'm trying to think about critical theory broadly construed, and specifically how the theoretical labor of Black women is put in service to kind of clean up, problems, or even problems of America. There's this expectations to like not read Black people's, but specifically Black women's work in ways that are patient. There's a way in which sometimes that work is cited or used to clean up people's mess. And that's what I'm interested in. And then in terms of Shakespeare, like I said, I mean, the question of gender has always been important, but specifically that women, that's why I'm doing this work on X, because I actually want to get to like, I want to be more specific.
Yeah. Okay. I just have one last question. So you did an interview back in 2014, it was a while ago,
No.
saying that I think it was related to the fellowship you did, but you said that you hope to bridge the gap between art and activism and bring art to individuals who otherwise do not have access to it. So then I would love to see, my question is just, how do you see your research, your art, as it relates to events of the past year, and just like the rise in like
You know,
appreciation?
I think that there's a way in which artists sometimes use whatever activist and investments they have in ways where the art itself becomes a stand-in for the activism. And I don't find that relationship symbiotic. I actually find it very parasitic on the work that is being done by Black people in the streets, literally risking their lives. And how dare we come in as artists to like try to like replace that and say that activism is my painting now. And I'm not saying that that is not, but I think it becomes a problem when we talk about artwork as activism in ways that actually end up usurping or suppressing the kinds of necessary rebellions that are happening in the streets. I cannot prescribe to artists like what to do, because that takes a lot of hubris to like claim to know what artists should be doing. But I do think that it's important to think about these questions and the role of our work in taking apart these questions and exposing certain things about our society in ways where we don't end up endowing our work with these magical qualities, because our work can only do so much. It has its limitations. And sometimes the limitations have to do with like the venue, like where the work is presented is already compromised, you know. But also, I've seen how institutions are increasingly being forced to think about issues of race and Blackness, in particular. But at the same time, I don't think that when we think about that, we should stop at celebration, because there's a way in which institutions are also trying now to capitalize on the labor of activists and capitalize on like Black people themselves, the Black people who are constantly being murdered. And so I don't think that the work is done. I think that institutions like theatrical and otherwise still need to think very seriously about like how to respond to these problems of anti-Blackness, not just through representation. Because I mean, another thing about representation is sometimes it creates this idea or feeling that like all of this racial brutality is happening elsewhere, right? It's happening elsewhere, and you can come into the theater and experience something different and transformational. And I'm like, no, the regimes of murder and brutality are actually not outside of the theater. Like those logics also fester inside the theater. So it's a problem for me when we reflect on race and racial brutality as something that is happening out there, that we come in as thespians, you know, I think that institutions are part of the problem. And it's important to actually reflect on how they contribute to the problem, as opposed to like this to exclusively focusing on how they are responding to the problem through the arts. Like you're not just responding to the problem, you're constantly creating it.
Yeah, those were all the questions I had for you. Oh, recording.